Good afternoon, everyone. I'm your lecturer for Financial Market Operations. My name is Amanda Pakinathan. So before we start off with our lectures, let's first go through the syllabus, what we have. So yeah, for September 2020 now, main objective of this subject is for you to have a broader knowledge on major operations of financial markets. So you here will study about the types of markets, what happens in those markets, what kind of instruments are traded, what kind of intermediaries are involved, and you will understand the entire operations of these big markets and certain incidents that caused crises in these markets and the recent developments in these markets. So the ultimate objective of this subject is for you to have a broader knowledge when it comes to financial markets. So we'll go through the headings, the types of studies that we have throughout this course period. So my study plan for this subject is where we will first start off with financial system and financial markets, a basic introduction, which we will cover today. And after that, we will move on to classifications of financial markets. Financial markets are classified into different categories on different bases. So we will cover that. Then we will move on to cover some fundamental concepts when it comes to financial markets. There are here in all three areas, in the first three subjects, we will have more theory involved, especially in the third chapter. Then the ones I've bolded here from 4th to 9th is where the major types of markets are covered. So we will start from money market, capital markets, forex markets, the structured finance product markets, and the financial derivative market. So these 5 are the main markets available, main types of markets, and under that capital market, you could broadly classify mainly into bonds and equity. So separate chapters being allocated for those. Now, when it comes to these 6 chapters, these are very crucial. So I would suggest for you to take part, mandatorily take part for those, because those involves calculations, calculating interest rates, calculating yields and compounding, and find the price of the instruments. So these 3 are very crucial. Then we move on to again some supporting areas when it comes to financial markets. So first we have financial market service providers. The providers, institutions who are available to support financial market transactions. Then we move on to major crises that happened in financial markets. Then we will cover the regulatory bodies that came about as a result of these crises and what are their functions and what do they cover. And then we will see the latest development when it comes to financial markets. So these 13 will be the basic chapters throughout this subject. This is how my timeline is. So here, but in terms of the 4th to 9th, the coverage would be a bit in depth. So there we might have at least 2 lessons per chapter to cover, whereas the others we should be able to finish off within 1 chapter in 1 week, 1 class, I mean. So with that, my target time is to finish this at least by first week of September, and then we'll have 2 classes separately dedicated for you to talk on your queries, a basic revision, run through of the project of the chapters in brief, and then we'll move on to past papers. So now I hope many would have joined in. So now let's move to the chapters in detail. Okay, please take it. Please look at the presentation that I've put up. It must have been uploaded for all. Time to time, I will move from the presentation I will move from the presentation to the board. So first, let's have a look at the presentation. So our first chapter for this subject is going to be Introduction to Financial System and Financial Markets. I hope you all can see the screen. Okay. So why you all might wonder why we are starting off with financial systems. Financial system is a broad area. Before you understand about financial markets, you need to have at least a basic idea in terms of financial systems. Now, I know you study financial system when it comes to IABF, under Survey of Financial System. But let's refresh that memory in this first chapter, because that's the foundation for financial markets. You need to understand what happens in the broader financial system for you to know what happens exactly in financial markets. So when it comes to financial system, what you need to know is the broad financial transactions and financial operations happens within this broader financial system. Financial system is a broader concept than financial markets. Financial system is where the entire channeling of funds from surplus units to deficit units actually happens. So financial system is a much broader area. From there, only financial markets is a component of the system. So first, let's see a diagrammatical view of financial system. This is the most common diagram when it comes to explaining financial systems. Let me go to the board for you to explain this in detail. Yeah, I hope you can see the board now. So let's see. In terms of financial system, you can see I did bold the financial system. The main function of financial system is to channel funds. That will be channeling funds. So you might ask, channel funds from who to whom? So here you have the savers, or what do you call the surplus units. And then on the other side, you have the borrowers, or you call them deficit units. Here, funds are excessively available. Here, funds are unavailable. They are at a deficit situation. So financial system, what it does is, main objective is to move the funds from this party to the deficit unit. Now, how the way this is being channeled is where financial markets, financial intermediaries, everybody comes into play. Now, there are two main ways on how this channeling happens. If it's a direct way, that's through financial markets. So here directly, the surplus units will come into contact with the deficit unit. And that occurs through the financial markets. Another way is where through financial intermediaries. Now, when financial intermediary comes in, the surplus unit and the deficit unit do not interact directly. It's an indirect interaction occurring through the financial intermediary. So the surplus unit will interact with the financial intermediary, and then the financial intermediary would actually correspond with the deficit unit. Let me put it on a better way. Financial, so this is direct. This is the indirect way. So here your correspondence would be with the financial intermediary. Intermediary would then correspond with the deficit unit. Now you might wonder, are these two actually corresponding? Isn't there any interaction between a financial intermediary and a financial market? Yes. Financial intermediary also interacts with the financial market, where through that they reach the deficit unit. That is also another way. So if you actually see in financial systems, there are three ways in which transaction channeling occurs. First is the direct way, where surplus unit and the deficit unit correspond to the financial markets. Second would be surplus unit and the deficit unit correspond through financial intermediaries. That would be this particular line. Is it clear? This particular entry. Third would be where surplus units will correspond with financial intermediary. Financial intermediary would then correspond with the market and through that reach the borrower. So this would be the third. Something like this, where your correspondence goes to the financial intermediary, he comes to the market and then it goes to the borrower. Now let's see some examples. The easiest one that you would know is the second one. Why? Surplus unit corresponding through the financial intermediary to the deficit unit is the basic banking system, where you collect deposits being collected by banks, and the banks in return lend it out to the deficit unit. So second one, basic deposit taking and lending is an example. Very first one is also an easier method that you would actually know but not noticed it. Here, when it comes to stock market based some IPOs, I'm not talking about secondary, IPOs, initial public offerings, the surplus units will directly apply for the shares through the market and reach the borrower. So here, remember, there can be a minimal intervention from a broker, but the main correspondence is between these two parties. Alright, so here you will have IPOs mainly. IPOs meaning initial public offerings, and this comes in equity markets. Now this you will study in detail when it comes to the equity market segment, but for now remember, initial public offering is where a share is newly issued to the market. For example, now let's say a brand new company is issuing shares for the very first time. That will be called initial public offering. So there the investors would directly apply and subscribe for the shares through the market, to the stock exchange, where the advertisements would be there, and that would reach the borrower. Then you have the third. Now, third is a very innovative method. Now, when it comes to third, one of the most common examples are funds, mutual funds. Alright? Or a very famous example is primary dealer. Now, I'll explain it to you in both ways. What does a mutual fund do? Mutual fund, what they do is they collect small deposits from the surplus units. It can be 10 rupees from each person, and they will collect it over here. They are a financial intermediary. They will collect it over here. The pool of funds collected will then be invested in a share or a debenture, and then the funds will reach the particular company. So that's why this mode is a fairly innovative way, where if you have a smaller surplus units, but a very smaller proportion of a surplus, they reach mutual funds, they have primary dealers, and through them they reach the borrower. We'll also see when it comes to primary dealers what happens. Primary dealers, what they do is, now they interact mainly with central bank and buy, true, but for them to actually bid for a treasury bill or a bond, they get the demand from the surplus units. The surplus units provide the demand, and they in turn bid at the auction, and the funds move on ultimately to the government. So basically, even though it's just one diagram, it explains so many different aspects. Mainly is there are two ways of channeling funds. One is direct and one is indirect. And actual mode of channeling occurs through three ways. One is basically direct, but when it comes to indirect, two ways is only through financial intermediary. Third is financial intermediary coming to the financial market and then reaching the borrower. So you have three ways where funds are channeled in a financial system. Now, next slide, if you move on, this is an addition that I have made. Now, if you see the second slide, it's from a famous author when it comes to financial markets. If you could access their soft copy of their ebook, it's very good. Have a read through it. But now for the third slide, I have made some amendments. What you have to see is, even though we see the fund movement, we also have to see how the risk and the return moves. Now, when it comes to risk, even though funds move this way, risk and return move the opposite to the funds. Return, whatever they earn, the profits or the risk, in the risk meaning the losses even, they move ultimately to the surplus units. So again, that channels through or in the three ways that we have noted. So that's why I have added risk or return. It can be both. And then another addition is the financial regulation. Now this entire financial system is being regulated, not just a component. So financial regulation is also another important component that we need to see. I have showed it to you earlier when we discussed through the lesson outline. Financial regulation, it would be our 12th chapter. So when we go through that, we will see who are the different regulators regulating different kinds of markets and what are their functions. So broader view, financial system is regulated. Now let's move on to see what are the components of financial system. Now just looking at this particular diagram, you can say who are the financial, hold on. Just by looking at this diagram, you can see the major components of financial system. So very first major component I would say is financial markets. So probably over here you can see. So very first is financial markets. Remember, these are components of financial system, financial markets. You can see it over there. Second, obviously, financial intermediaries. Now, why do I say these two as the main ones? We know financial system main function is channeling funds. To channel funds, you need to have this bridging. If not for this bridging, you can't match the surplus units with the deficit units. So one of the main components is financial markets and intermediaries. And then you also have financial instruments. Now you might wonder, why I can't see financial instruments in this diagram. Where is it? Financial instruments is a subset within the financial markets and financial intermediaries. For funds to be channeled, for funds to move from this surplus units to deficit units, it should occur through instruments. So instruments are the ways that the funds are being moved. So this is actually a subset. In all three modes, there is an involvement of financial instruments. Then is the broader one that I have added, financial regulation. Financial regulation is also one of the main components in order to protect both surplus units interest and deficit units interest. So financial regulation is a newly added and a mandatory component where initially we will, when we move on to the latter part of the chapter, we will discuss this in detail. When financial system first developed, it developed from unregulated systems to regulated systems. That's how regulations moved in. So regulation is also another new component. So these four in detail would be the main, or I would call it the primary components when it comes to financial system. But for this to work perfectly, you need to have supporting elements. Supporting elements. What are the main two supporting elements? One is financial market service providers, brokers, rating agencies, newspapers, Bloomberg. We will also discuss these in detail in another dedicated chapter. But these, they are important to support the activities that occurs in the financial system. And then you have financial market infrastructure, the basic payment terms, the security settlement systems. These are covered in this financial market infrastructure. These two are needed as supporting components. Now, let's see an example how a transaction occurs. Let's see how a transaction occurs, filtering through all 6 areas. I would have given this as an example in your note. You all can also refer in that. A basic example is buying shares. Let's see, you buy shares of Lanka IOC. Lanka IOC is a petroleum company, Indian petroleum company listed at the Colombo Stock Exchange. So you are going to buy shares from another investor at the stock market. So what is the market? You're going to take it from the stock market. So that will be CSE, the stock exchange. That's where you're going to have your transaction. Who is your intermediary? You would buy it through a broker. So broker is your intermediary. What is the instrument? Instrument would be shares. It can be even one share, but I'm telling you, for at least for one transaction, how all these components come together. Shares. And then who are the regulators in stock exchange? Security Exchange Commission. They will overlook whether the transaction happens in a duly regulated process. And then you will have financial market service providers. Who are the financial market service providers? You will have brokers giving you advice, rating agencies giving you ratings, and then you will also have also have research companies. When it comes to stock market, they will research about Lanka IOC, issue their expectation. They will say this share will move by 10 rupees in another 1 year. So those research reports are supporting for your transaction. You will be motivated by that to do your transaction. So you have research agencies, then you have rating agencies, and even brokers. See, brokers come here and also here as financial intermediary and also as financial service provider, because they do the transaction for you, but they also advise you on how to do it, on what shares for you to invest. If you talk to a broker, the broker will say, okay, now with the current market regulation, current market overview, investing in this share is the best, or don't touch that share. We are not expecting a very big return out of those shares. So that advice is a support to your transaction. And then you have the financial market infrastructure. So that is where you have your CDS, central depository system, on how your shares will get updated. The seller's shares will reduce in the CDS system and buyer's share will increase. And then you have your payment, how your fund moves from you to another investor. So CDS and the payment system is covered through this. So you can see just one transaction, it can be even one share. All these have to come together for you to effectively complete the transaction. So financial system is covered by all these six. These six are needed for you to effectively perform in the financial system. So now we will go through each component in detail, and we'll see why it's important for you to study financial markets. Okay, then we move on to financial intermediaries. Let me have small view of it. Okay. So when it comes to financial intermediaries, over here, financial intermediary is an entity which performs the function of channeling funds. They actually do financial intermediation. The function of financial intermediary is to do financial intermediation. What is financial intermediation? Channel your funds from surplus units to deficit units. Now, why do you need financial intermediary? Because there can be instances where surplus units or the savers can't directly work with the borrower. Why? You may not trust the borrower. You may not know where the borrower will use the funds for. You don't have the ability to check on them. So financial intermediary comes in when it's difficult for these two parties to work together. Get it? So these financial intermediaries can also be classified into different segments. Let's see that. I'll be erasing the board. We have this diagram in place so you can have a look. Okay. So financial intermediaries, can you all, I have to see the screen whether you all can see me. Can you all see? Yes. Financial intermediary. So what is their main role? Main role is financial intermediation. So basically they are there to do this function effectively. So I would have used the word efficient allocation. Efficient allocation of funds. We will see that when we study on main functions of financial intermediaries. Is the board not clear? Let me see. Okay, board is not clear. Shall I bring it in forward maybe? How about now? Okay. Why? Let's work with a lesser space then. Is it better? Okay, think it's better. Let's erase it and have more space then. Thank you, Dylan. Okay. So financial intermediaries. Their main role is financial, I would say it, efficient financial intermediation. Okay. So when it comes to efficient financial intermediation, what I mean is it is important for you to understand this role. Just financial intermediation is not the role. It has to be efficient for you to actually effectively give it to the right borrower. That's where efficiency coming, and at the right time allowing withdrawals. So that's where efficiency comes in. It's an important word. Okay, there are so many requests to use just the presentation and not the board. Okay, so let's only stick to the presentation then maybe. Okay. Okay, let's then stick to the presentation. But it's better if you all can also see the board, but it's all right. Let's see. When we do maybe a revision, hopefully things will be back to normal. So financial, in terms of the slide, you can see the second point, I have said role of efficient allocation. Because efficient allocation is where you need to identify the correct borrower and give it the correct timeline. It shouldn't be a longer term and you would get stuck for liquidity. You need to plan your liquidity, you need to plan your risk. So efficient allocation is done through financial intermediaries, and that's one of their major roles. So financial intermediaries can be broken down broadly into two categories. One is depository and non-depository. Is it better, guys? You all can see the presentation, right? Okay. So in terms of in terms of depository institutions, that is basic. One of the main examples is banks. So now if you take banks, they collect deposits and they grant loans. So depository institution, always have it in your mind, the basic example is banks. They collect deposits and they grant loans. That is their major role. So it's where if you draw a diagram, you will have take deposit from the savers and grant loans to the borrower. All right. So main example is licensed savings banks, commercial banks, and finance banks. It can be through any mode, current saving or fixed deposits, but you collect the deposit and you grant loans. Non-depository institutions is simple. They don't take deposits. You need to know the difference between the meaning of deposits. They don't take deposits. Non-depository institution. That is their main role, and these you can split it as contractual savings and also investment, and I'll explain further. Now, if you take contractual savings, so contractual savings institutions, What they do is they don't take deposits, they take contractual payments. A famous example is EPF. If you take employee provident funds, how they deduct is a contractual payment. You are obliged to pay for it. It's not deposit. Deposit is what you willingly put in a bank. Here it is a contractual payment, you're bound to make it. So you have examples like EPF, you have life insurance. So those companies, you're contractually bound to make a payment. They take that payment from the savers, and what they do is they don't grant loans, but they invest. So if you draw a diagram to differ depository and non-depository, depository institution collect deposit from a saver from the savings unit, but non-depository, they will take non-depository, especially contractual savings, they will take contractual payments. And on the other end, whereas depository institution will grant loans, non-depository institution will use it for their investments, or they will put it in financial markets. So basically, if you can recall the first diagram I showed you, depository institution do the second role, the second way of channeling funds. They take the funds from the saver and they directly give it to the borrower. But non-depository institution usually act in the third innovative way, where they take the funds from the saver, collect it, put it to the financial market, and through that reach the borrower. Now, contractual saving institutions have examples what I've told you earlier, and these you need to understand is they don't have this concept called withdrawals. They don't have frequent withdrawals. And if you see EPF, you don't withdraw every day from an ATM. No, only when you retire, or only when a certain when there are certain parameters on how you can withdraw. Only on that timeline they will give you funds. So non-contractual savings institutions don't really have to worry about liquidity. Unlike depository have to worry about liquidity. Why? Because people are willingly putting funds to their institutions, so they can withdraw at any time. But contractual savings, not as such. They know when they will actually withdraw. If it's a life insurance on the death of a person, or on a disease, or on a disease payment, something like that. So they contractual savings institution can freely invest long term. They can go for long term markets, long term instruments, shares, debentures, corporate bonds. So they can look into a horizon of more than 1 year when they do investments, having minimal amount as ready liquidity for any immediate withdrawals that they have. And they can plan the withdrawals. Each year they will know how many people are to retire, how many people are reaching that age. So then they will know how much of funds to be allocated. Investment intermediary is also another non-depository institution, but here they don't take deposits or they don't take contractual payments. What they do is they sell securities. They sell securities, collect the funds to do their own investments. All right. So that is the difference between depository and non-depository, and you also need to know the difference between contractual savings and investment subsidiaries. All right. Sorry. Okay, then we move on to the functions. Let's see the functions of financial intermediaries. Now, functions of financial intermediaries, I'm going to move from the very basic and go to the more in-depth ones. So one of the simplest functions is they collect funds. They collect funds from who? From lenders and from investors. So basically they collect funds from surplus units. Second function is they lend. They deploy that funds. they'll give that funds to deficit units either through lending or through investing. All right, so those two are the very basic ones. You can quickly think those when it comes to a basic function of a financial intermediary. Then you have asset transformation. Now this is a very important function when it comes to financial intermediary. They convert or transform asset. Let's see, it happens in three particular ways. First is maturity intermediation or maturity transformation. Second is risk reduction, and third is cost reduction. Now let's see an example. Okay. Now when it comes to maturity intermediation, you have short-term assets and you convert it into long terms. You meaning I'm talking about financial institution. Think of a bank. Now the bank collects savings deposits. Saving deposits is relatively short term. You can withdraw at any time. But they collect the deposits in savings and they lend it out. They give it as a loan. Okay. Now savings account is an asset for the depositor. Loan is an asset for the financial institution. So the asset, a shorter term asset, has been converted to a longer term asset, and that happens through financial intermediation. So to perform this function, financial intermediaries must be there because they only can bridge it. All right. Now risk reduction is you take riskier assets and you convert it into safe havens, or you convert it into risk-free assets. Not exactly risk-free, but a lesser riskier asset. Now there you have asset-backed securities. That's a structured finance product where you take loans of maybe if you take a finance company, they have leases. So a bank, what they will do is they will collect all the leases and they will issue asset-backed securities for investors, which is much safer. So the risk movement is reduced. And then you have cost reduction. Cost reduction is, imagine when savers and deficit units, they have to directly correspond. The transaction cost is very huge. So financial intermediary comes in and helps to reduce this transaction cost. They will help you to easily process information. They will give you more information than what a standalone saver can find, and they will help you contract in more better terms. All right. So the main function, asset transformation, is done in three sub functions. Those are the ones I've explained. But the main function, what it does is asset transformation. So asset transformation is one of the important functions when it comes to financial intermediaries. And then you have facilitating trading of financial assets for customers through brokering arrangement. Now, that's known. Brokering arrangements, brokers, what they do is they help to trade through their arrangements. They help to trade shares, to debentures, to promote the instrument. All right. Okay. And then you have trading of financial assets by using financial intermediaries' own funds to take a position in a financial asset that the financial institute's customer wants to transact in. Now I know this is complicated. Now let me break it down for you. What I mean here is, it will be, think of a broker, financial broker. He has a customer who wants to buy a particular share. But that particular customer doesn't have the money. Think it's a John Kill share, 10 rupee share, and the customer doesn't have 10 rupees to buy the share. So what does the broker do? Broker will use their own funds and buy the share on behalf of the customer for the customer. All right. So that is the function. That is called margin trading. So here what happens is, the investor also becomes a borrower there. All right. He invests in the share by borrowing from the financial broker. So that's what I mean here. Trading of financial assets by using FI owns funds. Again, brokers owns funds are being used to take a position. To take a position meaning it can be a buying position or a selling position in a financial asset that the financial intermediaries customer wants to transact in. All right. Then you have assisting in the creation of financial assets for its customers, and then either distributing those financial assets to other market participants. So as I told you, securitization, asset-backed securities, the designing, they actually create a financial asset for their customer. It can be commercial papers, it can be debentures. The intermediary will create the asset for the customer and then also distribute it to other investors and promote it for you. Then you have the very basic providing investment advice to customers, and then you have managing financial assets of customers. Seventh one, what you need to know is managing financial assets of customers is where there are, even in Sri Lanka, there are companies who manage portfolios, private portfolios, and that happens for high net worth individuals. If you are a person with maybe over 100 million, and then you want to use that 100 million, you have 100 million with you and you want to invest in the stock market. So what you do is you take a financial, something like an investment bank, and you say, okay, I will give you 100 million. You manage the portfolio on behalf of me. So the investment bank will take the 100 million and will invest in several types of financial assets. It can be treasury bills, shares, corporate bonds. Depending on the interest of the investor, the investment bank will do the financial investments and manage the portfolio. And that is the function what I'm talking here. Not many know about it, but if you say there are unit trusts who do these functions, there are investment banks who do these functions, and these are mainly done for high net worth individuals. All right. Now, if you go through all these 7 functions, what you can clearly notice is function 1 to 3 are more functions of depository institutions. All right. But functions, when it comes to 4 to 7, the second slide, 4 to 7 is more of non-depository financial institutions. They don't take deposits, but the ones who act based on contractuals or based on sale of instruments. So their functions are covered by 4 to 7, whereas 1 to 3 is covered, one covers the functions of depository institutions. All right. Then we move on to financial instruments. Let me see whether you all have any queries. If there's any questions, just mention in the chat box. I will attend to that. Let's go back. Okay, financial instruments. Financial instruments is the instrument that is going to channel funds from the saving units to the deficit units, what we saw in the earlier diagram. So these are intangible assets. You can't particularly see financial instruments. Those are intangible. And they give you, if you have a financial instrument, it gives you the right or the claim for future cash flows. That is the main advantage or main purpose of owning a financial instrument. That is going to give you a claim on the future cash flows. All right. Now, financial instruments can be called in variety of names, and many students actually confuse it. Because financial instruments can be called securities, can be called financial assets, can be called financial claims. These all refers to financial instruments. So one of the basic examples of financial instruments will be treasury bills, treasury bonds, shares, debentures, corporate bonds. These are invisible to us. They doesn't have a physical form, but they help to transfer funds from the surplus to the deficit. All right. And when you have any transaction with financial instruments, there are at least bare minimum two parties, definite must. First one is an issuer. There should always be an issuer. There should be someone to issue the financial transaction instrument. So issuer is the one who's going to issue the financial instrument and therefore is contractually bound to make payments for the instruments. All right. Now it's like this. Lanka IOC is issuing shares. Therefore, IOC has to pay dividends. All right. Or another example would be a government issuing treasury bills. I'm issuing treasury bills. I will have to pay the face value when it matures. Government issues treasury bonds. Government will have to pay the coupon. All right. Investor, on the other hand, is the one who owns the financial instruments, and therefore they get the right for the future cash flow. All right. Now these are the main two and the very basic parties. There are complicated transactions with several other parties, and that we will see when it comes to each particular instrument. All right. Whenever I press that, it goes to the older slide. Okay, so the driving force behind operating or transacting in a financial market is for the surplus units or the investors to earn a return. If they don't have that desire, they're not going to come into the financial system in the first place. All right. So the driving force for the surplus units is wealth maximization. They want to earn return. So for you to earn return comes in two forms. One is yield and another one is capital gain. Very simple. Yield is the return that you earn by holding to the asset. By owning the asset, what you are going to earn is going to be your yield. Something like dividends. Take in terms of shares. If you have a share, you will get the return. So the return is called dividend. So dividend is more like the yield of owning a share. But capital gains is increase in the financial instrument's value. It's an additional return that you're going to earn out of it. All right. And that is not by holding the asset, you're not going to get capital gains. By selling the asset, you're going to get capital gains. Do you get it? Yield is by owning the asset, you're going to get dividends. Okay. Capital gain will only materialize when you sell the instrument. If you sell the share at a higher price than what you bought, you're going to get capital gain. But if you hold on to the share, you will get dividends. So investors' preference of whether they want dividends or whether they prefer capital gains, that will derive your strategy for investment. If you are a more active trader, and if you are looking for more return, then you will go for capital gains. Why? You will buy and sell quickly and earn a return and move on. You don't want long-term investments. That's an example. So depending on what return that you focus or what you prefer, your investment strategy will differ. And then in terms of financial instruments, main functions of financial instruments is basic. Two main functions. One is it's going to allow you to transfer funds. As I said before, that is the main function. It's going to allow you to transfer funds from the deficit, from the surplus to the deficit. But just as I've shown you in the earlier diagram, just like how funds move from the surplus to the deficit, risk will also move from the deficit, from the borrowers to the savers. So redistributing risk is also a function of financial instrument. Do you get it? Now, if you have shares and you have invested in a company, if the company doesn't do good, you're going to bear the consequences of it as an investor. What is actually sending or giving that risk to you? The share. Because you own the share, you are exposed to the risk. But as a company is able to redistribute the risk. All right. Let's see if you have any questions. Okay, no questions? Next, we move on to financial regulation. Let me first have a bit of water. In your explanatory tute, I would have explained different types of financial intermediaries. You all can go through that. That's one of the basic ones that I give, because there are some students who don't have a particular ideas when it comes to certain big or unknown financial intermediaries. If you want, I will run through that. Most uncommon ones that you would have heard would be specifically mutual funds and hedge funds. It's not very common in Sri Lanka, so it's very hard for students to understand what it means. Pension fund is easier. Pension fund, always think of EPF in your head. That is very easy to understand that concept. But mutual funds is more like a unit trust. There are unit trusts in Sri Lanka, but it's not very aware of. There are about 14 unit trust companies in Sri Lanka, but the way they're not very exposed or publicized in financial markets. So what mutual funds that they do is, it's more regulated and a more safer way to invest. They will pool funds from smaller investors. They will collect funds and they will actually make the investment in financial market. Hedge funds is much more riskier and much more unregulated. They take on more risks than mutual funds. Now these also we will discuss further, but I've explained it very in detail in our note. Both mutual and hedge funds are funds. That's a commonality between both. Both are pooled funds. That's the only similarity. But the way they transact, mutual fund is a regulated fund, hedge fund is unregulated and it's more customized and it's very risky, hedge funds. Okay, so if you have any clarification, if you have any doubts or need any explanations, just mention in the chat box. I will explain a bit further on that. We'll move on to financial instrument regulations. So financial regulators, the main purpose of financial regulators is to protect the savers and also protect the deficit units. You have to protect them as well. You can't, not only the investors. There are situations where investors do particular transactions which will overprice a company's share and lead to a downfall of a company. So broader sense, regulation is to cover all market participants. It's there to monitor and to regulate all participants and to safeguard everyone's interest. Okay. So now, reason for financial regulation. Why financial regulation came in is because of three main reasons. One is to ensure that there is fair treatment to all market participants, because there are instances where there is unfair treatment or privileged treatment for some market participants. There can be fraudulent actions. So to avoid all those and to ensure everyone has a common footing is where financial regulations come in. Also, another one that's a very famous one is to avoid insider trading. So that is covered by the second one. To ensure disclosure of accurate information for investment decision making. When information is disclosed only to a part of investors and not for the others, one set becomes more privileged. They will either buy the share first or they will either sell the share first. So that will result in the other investors' loss. So to avoid that and to ensure that everyone has a fair treatment and to have a same information being spread out across all investors, regulation has come in. And then another very important one is to improve the soundness and the robustness. The word robustness means strength of the financial system. To improve the strength of the financial system and the intermediaries, regulations had to come in. Because if without the due to the absence of financial regulations, they have a weaker intermediaries, they have a weaker financial systems that were more prone to crises and collapses. So financial regulations came in and upped the standard, improved the standard. So the financial system and the intermediaries are more stronger to bear for any shocks. Okay, so now we'll see some examples. These three are the most common ones, and I'm going to link it to you with the three reasons. First one is Sarbanes and Oxley Act. That's one of the turning point when it comes to regulation. Corporate governance. Now you know why Sarbanes and Oxley Act came in is due to Enron. Enron bankruptcy, investors getting hurt, and to tighten the company's governance and to make sure it actually acts to the welfare of the investors, this act came in. So this is basically covering the very first reason, to ensure fair treatment for all investors and to make sure that governance of a company is not done poorly. All right. And then you have the US Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act. It's abbreviated or most commonly simplifiedly known as Dodd-Frank Act. Dodd-Frank came after financial crisis in 2008. Now, 2008 financial crisis was a major event, which we'll also study in detail. Now, that major event gave the consequences were huge. So because of that, financial regulation has to be more strengthened to look into several aspects. So one of the main acts that came is the US Wall Street Reform Act or the Dodd-Frank Act. If the exam asks you what is Dodd-Frank, you need to know the elaborated version. So I suggest you know the entire name of the act. That allowed to have more tighter regulation on the intermediaries and the markets, so that the traders or the financial intermediaries didn't misuse or missell products to the investors. Misuse or missell products to the investors. That's one of another turning point when it comes to regulation. And the third one is very commonly known among all bankers. If you don't know this, I don't know how you're a banker. Very first, the main one is Basel III. Now, Basel regulation was there before the financial crisis in 2008. Basel I, then moved to Basel II. But Basel III showed a major need due to the financial crisis in 2008. There were so many shortcomings with Basel II. The financial intermediaries use these weaknesses to leverage on their transactions. So to cover all the shortcomings, Basel III had to come in. Now, Basel III had increased capital standards, allows the financial intermediary to bear more risk and also focus on liquidity. So the third for Basel III covers the third reason as to why do you need financial regulation to increase the strength of the financial system and also the financial intermediaries. Okay. And then we move on to the supplementary components of financial system. The very first one, as we discussed earlier, is financial service providers. Financial service providers, now you don't have a definition, a single definition for financial service provider. The main role of a financial service provider, you need to understand, is to support market participants with their transactions. It can be a seller of a financial instrument, it can be a buyer of financial instrument. So to support market participants overall, financial service providers are available. The common ones I've told you is brokers and dealers. Now, brokers and dealers are brokers when it comes to shares, especially. When you buy shares or sell shares, brokers give you advice. They give you portfolio management advice. They will tell you these shares are more attractive these days. There's so many foreign interest in these particular shares, and they will suggest you, okay, hold on to this share a bit more, don't sell it now. So those investment advices are given by brokers. Same way with dealers. Now when you think of dealers, think about primary dealers. Primary dealers will give you forecasts on how the rates will move in the money market or even the bond market. They will guide your they will guide your investments when it comes to those in terms of the debt side of it. Research companies. Now research companies meaning there are, now this is also not very known among the market participants in Sri Lanka. There are companies like Asia Research. Then you have Capital Alliance, and then you have John Keel Stockbrokers with a research arm of it. What they do is they research about companies. They will research about companies, do a valuation for their shares, and they will see in 1 year where will this share move to. Will the share price decline or will the share price increase? And depending on that, they will advise the broker. They will advise the broker, okay, we expect this share to move up, so you can suggest this share to your investors. Always a brokering firm has a research firm, because their advice that they give has to be based on concrete facts. So research companies support maybe the direct investor, or through the broker they help to support the investor. Now you will wonder, okay, only the investor is being supported. Why isn't the deficit unit or the company? Now if you think about a new company coming to list their shares, let's think about a very newly listed would be Real was newly came into the stock market. You have BPPL. It's a brush company that came into Colombo Stock Exchange very recently. So when they came recently to issue their shares, firstly they will approach research companies. So research companies will see the financial statements of the companies, and they will say, okay, we will have to price your share in this way. We will have to market your share in this way. So they will help the borrower on how to structure how to value their units, how to value their instrument when they go to the market. So in that way, research companies will help the deficit or the borrower. Rating agencies. Rating agencies are also important, especially when it comes to bond market. When you have debentures or commercial papers being issued, the issuer has to be rated. So you have Fitch rating, you have ICRA rating. So they will rate the issue and they will give you A, AA, A plus with a detailed research, with a detailed rating report. So the investor can actually go through the rating report and see whether it's viable to invest in this instrument or not. In terms of the company, what it's better is they will, when they get rated, they will know whether their instruments are tradable or attractive in the market. Now, if you have A rated instruments, it can be easily traded in the market. Why? A rated is you expect a better return for not a better return, better performance for the company, and the company is more strengthened and robust. But if you have a double C, triple B is mediocre, but double B, those companies, okay, that means, okay, when you issue this instrument with a double B or a C, not many are going to subscribe for it. So at that time, you have to maybe increase the return, or maybe go for a bank for a guarantee, with maybe a credit guarantee, go to the market. Something. So the support in that way is given by rating agencies. Credit bureau, very common. You have CRIB in Sri Lanka. So CRIB, what they do is a service provider. They will help the bank to make better credit decision. They will help the bank to make a better credit decision. They will know more about the customer, their payment pattern, and they will know how they work with other banks, whether they have overdues with other banks, whether they have a better relationship, and that will also show on how many banks have actually inquired this CRIB. So now you will wonder, why do we have to know that? Now see, if you have a borrower who already has several credit lines with so many banks, when you go to lend to the borrower, you will think as a bank, if they have so many credit lines, why am I going to give something new? Why isn't he using other lines? Or has he fully utilized all lines? Or has he defaulted those lines? So to know those, credit bureau actually supports you. And then you have Bloomberg and Reuters. Bloomberg is like a holy grail when it comes to Treasury Department. So for them to know the exchange rates quoted, the movements in financial markets abroad, for up-to-date quick information, Bloomberg and Reuters is important. They're like the information providers. And then you have media or press. So the more internationally renowned Economist, Wall Street Journal, and then you have Financial Times, giving you more insights of a company on what their future directions are, their difficulties, their challenges. Now, even locally, you have some sites called Economy Next, or then you have LBO. Those sites actually give you more industry insight, and then they give you more insight to the company. So that will help you to make a more informed decision as an investor, and as a company or as a borrower, it will help you to shape how the public thinks of the company. So when a bad news gets out, you will have to manage it. How do you manage your publication or your publicity is important, especially through financial service providers. It's done. Then you have financial market infrastructure. This is like the last or the second supporting component when it comes to financial markets, and this is like the foundation for financial system, because if not for an infrastructure, transacting in a financial system is going to be difficult. It's actually a nightmare. So let's see what that is. Financial market infrastructure is a multilateral system among participating financial institutions, including the operator of the system, used for purposes of recording, clearing, and settling. It can be payments, securities, derivatives, or financial transactions. Now, you don't have to memorize this definition, but understand the definition. What is the purpose of market infrastructure? To record the transaction, to clear the transaction, or to settle the transaction. Okay? And what do they do? It can be in terms of payments, or the transaction can be payment, or a security, or a derivative, or a financial transaction. Now, why is it called multilateral? Because there are so many parties involved in this financial infrastructure, including the operator of the system. Now, it's something like check clearing. You have all the banks involved and also Lanka Clear involved. So there you will record the transaction and you will clear the transaction. And then if you have RTGS settlements, you have settlements coming in. So that's why it's called multilateral system, where you have participating financial institution, including the operator also involved, because operator has to be also involved in it. And for why? To record, clear, and to settle what? Payment, securities, derivatives, and any other financial transaction. Now, what is the objective? Main objective when it comes to financial market infrastructure? Very basic: safety and efficiency. Now, financial market infrastructure has to be safe. If it's not safe, you won't have the confidence to actually get into the infrastructure and do a payment. Something like online banking. If you are scared that the system is hacked, you're not going to get into the infrastructure. So safety is the biggest objective when it comes to infrastructure. So they are the operator. If you now here I've mentioned operator of the financial infrastructure. Now think it's an online banking system. The bank is the operator of the system. So the bank has to manage the risk more proactively. Now, if you see even today, you would have got this alert where saying the websites have been hacked, government websites. So if something like that happens to a bank's online system, imagine how much of information will get leaked, how much of fraud that can be happen. So bank has to proactively take measures to cover it. So what they will first do is, now these are the steps that I've explained in detail for you to understand better. Firstly, you need to know what kind of risk that can actually get transmitted out of the system, or the risk that can actually threaten the system. You need to identify those. And then you will have to see, okay, if that from where is the risk that's going to come in? From where, what is going to be the source of that risk? First is you need to know what type of risk you will be challenged by. Then is what is the source of that risk? And then after that you will have to see what are the mechanisms for you to counteract the sources. And if you can stop spreading of the source, or you can lock the source at its beginning itself, you don't have to worry about the risk materializing. Okay. Now these risk, it can be technological risk, it can be a legal safety risk, or it can be in terms of even liquidity, there can be an issue, or it can be operational risk. Technological safety risk is hacking. Operational safety risk is in terms of your internally, there is an issue when it comes to safety. Internally, frauds happening. So I have mentioned the various ways a safety risk can come in. Technology, it can be a legal, it can be a liquidity, it can be investment or operational. All right. Now, efficiency is another thing. You can have the safest infrastructure in the world, but if it is not efficient meaning if it cannot do a transaction at a speed or very clearly or rightly, you're not going to go into that system. Clear? Now you can have the most safest online banking system, but if it takes about 10 minutes to get into the system, about 30 minutes to log in and get your screen and do the transaction, you're not going to go to that financial infrastructure medium. Do you get it? So that is what covered under efficiency. Not only safe, but it also have to be efficient. And efficient meaning it has to be timely, it has to be consistent in terms of clearing and the settlement. Okay. Now, if it's inefficient, it will distort your customer's transaction, and that will actually result in so much of a loss in terms of lost customers. Because now you can see so many banks investing heavily into their online banking platforms, directly 24/7 transaction being allowed. So those, it has to be done quickly, log in quickly, effected quickly, settled quickly. So if you can't do that in this era, then customers are ready to shift to another bank. All right, so it's an important aspect that you need to monitor. Then we will look at the main clearing and settlement systems in Sri Lanka. Let me see whether they all have any questions first. Okay, no questions so far. So the main infrastructure methods that we have in Sri Lanka. All right. So the very common one that we know is check imaging and truncation system that is operated by Lanka Clear. For you to clear interbank checks on a T1 basis, on a T is the day the transaction happens or the day the check is deposited, and the very next day the check is cleared. Now this happens for interbank, not for house checks. House checks can be cleared on a T basis, on the same day itself it can be cleared. And then you have slips. Slips is also managed by Lanka Clear, and it's an online interbank fund transfer system for low values less than 5 million. And usually slips, even though it's online, it's a more batch processing system, and it has certain timelines. It can be done at different times of the day only. It's restricted, you can't do at any time. All right. And it has a time where it will get settled or it will get cleared and go to the beneficiary. So here you will know is slips, you all must be knowing it through experience, but for the others I'm explaining, it's a low value, it handles low value, and it's an online system, but it processes on batch basis. Your salaries and all comes through slips. And it has certain cutoffs of the day that it will do the transactions in. Okay. Now next you have the newly introduced method, the SEFT system, Common Electronic Fund Transfer Switch. So many online banking systems are based on the SEFT system. Actually, they will allow the user, the customer, to choose between a slip and a SEFT if they want to get it done by a SLIF mode or a SEFT mode. SEFT is more real time. The moment you do the transaction in a matter of seconds, the beneficiary will get the funds. So it's a real time facility, and it's done by Lanka Pay, and the SEFT members are the banks, and that will allow you to withdraw through ATM soon, to do your transactions through mobile banks, through internet banking, even during the non-banking hours, even when the banks are closed, even on weekends, you will be able to effect your transactions. So that's a new addition to the platform. Then you have the most commonly called RTGS. It's very known by any banker. Real-time gross settlement system. Now, you know slips is to a maximum of 5 million, it will do transaction. So anything above 5 million, it's done through RTGS. RTGS is a real-time settlement. If you do it in the day, within the day, the funds will reach the beneficiary, and it's high value. Now, scriptless security settlement system is a way that treasury bills and bonds are traded paperless. Scriptless meaning paperless way of settling securities. So it's like something like CDS for share market. We will also learn that in detail. It helps you to buy the treasury bill and sell treasury bill or bonds, or sell treasury bill or bonds without any paper being involved. It's all computerized. So when you buy a treasury bill, your scriptless security settlement will get updated. So you will have a new security being inserted into your account, and the security will move out from your account. Same like a CDS. Okay. But what you need to know is RTGS and the scriptless security settlement system is operated by Lanka Settle. Check the CITS, and the slips is done by Lanka Clear. And the SEFT is managed by the Lanka Pay system, with the SEFT members being involved. Okay. So now we have gone through all the other components of financial system. We went through financial intermediaries, we went through financial instruments, then we went through financial regulation, service providers, and even infrastructure. And now we are going to move into financial markets. Now let's see what a market is in the first place. Market is basically a setup. You can't say as a location. Now remember, when I'm using certain terms, I'm being very careful here. Setup is the correct term, because market is not only one particular location. It can be over phone, or it can be through a location. So just saying location restricts the scope. So even when you're writing, the word setup is much more better. It's a setup where two or more parties get involved to exchange something. All right. So that is basically a market, and market will definitely have a seller and a buyer. The seller will sell the goods for cash, and the buyer will buy the goods by giving cash. So there is a two-way transaction. There is always a good movement, goods being moved, and you will also have funds being moved. All right. Similarly, financial market is also a setup where two or more parties involved in, but here the movement is not goods. There will be a fund movement, but here the counter transaction is not a goods movement, it's an instrument movement. Financial instrument is being moved in return for funds. Okay, so you can see through the exchange of financial instruments, the market will facilitate the flow of funds. It can be, so that will be the way the funds will move from the savers to the deficit units. All right. So the third is the important point. It's very common way to describe financial markets. Financial market is the market for credit and capital. I have within bracket put an explanation for you to understand better. When you say market for credit, it's the debt market. When you say market for capital, it is the equity market. Simple as that. So financial markets, you can very easily understand it's a market for credit or it can be a market for capital. And financial market is a component of financial system. I can't stress this enough, but always keep this in your head. Financial system is the broader concept. Financial market is only a component of it. Now you will wonder why did we go through all these other components to study about financial markets. Now at the very first, when I first started the lecture, I showed you the lesson plan that we have. Now when we went through the lesson plan, I told you from chapter 4 to chapter 6 onwards, we will have the main markets being discussed. And when we discuss these markets, we are going to study what is this market doing. And we will study what kind of instruments these markets trade and who are the intermediaries who act in this market. All right. And what are the settlement or the infrastructures available in this market and what are the regulations. So standalone, you can't just study markets. You need to know other components as well. And that is why we went through each component in brief. So it's better for you when you move on to the other chapters. So now we have the functions of financial markets. Financial market, the very main function. Why do we have financial market? Is for liquidity. For you to have liquidity, you need to have a market available. Now let me explain. What is liquidity? The word liquidity is defined or is being explained as ability to sell a financial instrument or maybe an asset quickly at the fair market price at the least cost possible. Okay, so it's the ability to sell asset quickly at the fair value at the least cost possible. Now think you don't have a market. Now shares are being traded and you don't have a stock exchange. And you have IOC shares and you want to get a buyer. You want to sell these shares and you want to get a buyer for these shares. What will you do if you don't have a market? You will have to search for buyers, which will involve cost, which will involve time. And even if you find a buyer, that buyer might not want at your price. So it's very difficult to do the matching. So financial markets is there to bridge this gap. So in a financial market, it's a common platform which so many sellers and so many buyers correspond. So you can easily find find a buyer for your shares. Now, especially if you see the trading platform, it's very easy. For each share, they will show how many bids are placed, how many people are willing at what price. So it's now if you're a buyer, you can see so many. Okay, 1,000 shares at 10 rupees per share, 1,000 share at 15 rupees. So it's a matter of just clicking. So this arrangement is given by financial markets. So liquidity is the main function when it comes to financial markets. And then you have price discovery. Price discovery or price setting. Now, certain assets will not have a price if there is no market. Okay. Now, only because there is a market, demand and supply come in and you can get a price, a readily available price. But if you don't have that, market, you don't have a way to decide or you don't have a way to discover the price of that instrument. Now here what I mentioned is value of a share of a stock is no more or no less than what someone is willing to pay to own it. So it's basically the supply and the demand. Get it? So markets provide the price discovery as a way for you to know, as a way for you to understand the value and at the price point in which you can sell. Okay? So that's another result. It's a resulting function. The resulting function is price discovery. And based on price discovery is where you get the next function, asset valuation. Now, because you are able to discover the price or set a price for your financial instrument, you are able to value your financial instrument. You are able to value that asset. If there is no market, it's harder for you to discover a price, and because you don't have a price, you will not know how to value that asset. So as a result, because of price discovery, we also have asset valuation. All right. And then you have raising capital. Financial market, one of the another major function is it helps you to raise capital. Now, raise capital meaning the companies will come in, issue their shares, and then it allows you to raise capital. All right. A mode or setup where you can raise capital for your investment needs. And investing. For the surplus units, it's a way to come and invest your excess funds and earn a return. Risk management. Now this you will wonder, why is that a function of financial markets? Financial markets allows the investors to manage their risks. Now if not for financial markets, you will not know, you will not have you will be exposed to liquidity risk. Okay, you will have settlement risk, you will have counterparty risk. So these risks are managed because of financial markets. Because financial markets are available, you're able to manage these risks. And then you have reduction of transaction cost. I explained this to you before at liquidity also. Because markets are available, it's there as a bridging between the surplus and the deficit. You can cut down on transaction cost heavily. You're able to meet a seller or a buyer quickly at the same price that you want. So then you don't have to spend more cost searching for the perfect, for the right seller or the right buyer, or spend time, spend the cost in terms of buying the getting the right seller or the buyer. And also when it comes in terms of information cost, that's also a transaction cost. You don't have to spend much in terms of information cost, because in a market so many investors will have their insights, brokers being involved, so they will help you to do the transaction in a way of a lesser cost than if you don't have the particular financial market. Now, what you need to know at the beginning of the lecture, also I've explained it to you when I'm explaining about regulation, markets or the systems, the history of it. When it started in an unregulated way, and then only regulation moved in. In terms of markets, also the very basic or the immediate classification is formal and informal. Now, if you have, now let me first explain informal. Informal markets is not regulated, easy as that. It's not regulated, it's not systematic, and it's more convenient. Why convenient? You don't have documentation, you don't have too many questions. It's just a arm's length transaction between two parties. A basic example would be informal pawn brokers, where you will have, if I have a jewelry and I need immediate funds, I will call my neighbor and say, okay, I have a jewelry, I will give you my jewelry, can you give me this amount? And then they will lend. It's informal, it's not systematic. You don't sign documents, you don't have a receipt to prove your pawning, no, nothing as that. It's an informal arrangement. You have cheat to system. where people collect pool funds and each one gets the bulk fund at the beginning. Now how sheet to system work is you collect, everyone pools in 5,000 at the beginning, and then think about two people pool in, it will be 10,000. So at the beginning, and they put a cheat to say who will get the first 10,000. So the one who gets number one will get the first 10,000. And then on the second month, again, when they put 5,000, the second person gets it. So it's a different way of pooling funds, but it's very, very informal, not regulated. Why I'm stressing on non-regulated is if a fraud happens, if a person runs away with the jewelry, if a person runs away with your money, there is no way a regulator can come in and enforce and protect it. That's one of the main concerns in unorganized and informal markets. Okay. Formal and organized markets is the very opposite of it. It's very regulated. Think about our banking system. Think about our stock exchanges. It's very regulated. You have documentation involved, so many protection schemes, so many criteria for you to get into the market. Okay, so that's a formal market. And there you have more protection than the informal markets. Now we will see how formal markets were promoted. I told you before, it started as informal and then moved into formal. Now we are going to see why was this movement? Why did it move from informal to a more formal markets? And these are the reasons. The very first reason is the function of a financial market: liquidity. Because formal markets gave you more liquidity, formal markets were preferred than informal markets. Now let me explain that in detail. Now liquidity, again, as I explained it to you before, ability for you to sell the asset quickly at the fair value and at the least cost. Okay. Now if you don't have a regulated market and you have an unregulated market, and you go to a person to sell asset, whatever that person says is the only way. You can't spend more time, waste more time finding more buyers. Okay. So at that time, because you can't waste more time to get your urgent funds, it's not actually liquidity. You're going to earn lesser than your fair value. Okay. But because you have formal markets, you are able to get buyers or sellers at the price that you prefer quickly, and you can always transact at the market value because you know the market value. If it's an informal setup, you don't know the market value. When you don't know the market value, now think a jewelry, because you don't know share is going at 10 rupees, you would have undersold it at 5. But because there is a formal market and everybody knows the price, market price, you will sell closer to the market price. So that is why formal markets are more preferred than informal markets. Main reason, liquidity. Let me have a bit of water. Hold on. And then you have transparency. That's also very obvious. Transparency is because in a formal market, everyone knows the price at which you're transacting, and they know the volume that you're transacting. I will one day show you the trading platform of a share stock brokering. It's just a matter of sitting behind looking at a screen where you will see on the buyers on your left hand side bidding 1,000 shares at 10 rupees, 1,000 shares at 15 rupees. And then on your right hand side, you will see sellers bidding. I will buy 100 at 10. I will buy 1,000 at 5 rupees. So you can readily see the market prices, the offers. It's very transparent. But in an informal market, it's not transparent. Someone in a different location would have done a different same asset being transacted. But because you don't have access to that information, you would have traded at a different price. So transparency is also one of the reasons why people moved from informal setup to a more formal setup. That allow them to have more understanding about the market that's happening and be more aware about what they are worth, what the worthiness of the instruments. And then you have reliability. Formal markets, because they are regulated and protected, are always reliable. The counterparty risk is minimal, especially because you're trading at an exchange where seller is, you're selling it through the exchange. It's the counterparty risk is mitigated. Now think about informal setup where you arrange the transaction, but at the day that you're going to do the transaction, the counterparty is saying, no, I don't want to buy the asset. No, I don't want to buy at this price. Or I'm not willing to buy. That doesn't happen in terms of a stock exchange. It's a real time settlement happening at the very same time. So counterparty risk is minimal. And then you have legal procedures to help enforce contract and to settle disputes. So legal procedures, that's very basic feature of formal markets. Because of that also people prefer formal markets because they know their interests are protected. They're not going to, the chances of being a fraudulent activity is minimal. I'm not saying no frauds, but the chances of that occurring is minimal, and even though it happens, there are ways to protect you. Now something like you have this 600, the deposit insurance scheme. That's a way for you to protect the depositors. Even if there's a fraud happening in the banking system or a collapse, still there is a scheme to compensate you. But if you have, now that's a problem. If you see now, there are informal money lenders who cheat on customers and run away. Central bank can't actually go and compensate because they are not part of the formal system. Okay, so that those reasons actually encourage people to come or move into a more formal system. And that's the other reason, suitable investor protection and regulation. And then you have low transaction costs. Just as I mentioned before, as a function of financial markets, low transaction cost is a motivating factor to move into more formal markets. Easier for you to do the transaction, no any cost involved, no any cost meaning very lesser cost compared to informal arrangements, where like you will have to pay a minimal brokerage fee or a minimal contracting fee. You don't have to pay hefty amounts to actually search for a counterparty. And then finally, after all this, we come to understand on how financial markets have evolved. Now, first we understood the introduction of financial markets, and then we went through about the basic history. It moved from informal setup to a more formal setup, yes. And then why did it move? The reasons of moving. And then even in a formal setup, there are certain changes happening, so many improvements happening in financial markets. And what are the reasons for those improvements? We will cover the recent developments at the very last of the subject. That will be a 13th chapter. But now we will see what are the reasons that are inducing you to do a change or for a change to happen in a financial market. The most important and the obvious factor is technology. Whenever technology improves, there is a change in financial markets. Now, if you see how transaction happened in 1980s to how transactions are happening right now, you can see a drastic development. You have system like SEFT coming in, markets like derivative markets coming in. So all these changes are because of technology. The way you transact in a financial market, the needs, the products that are in financial markets are being evolved mainly because of technology. And then another main factor is deregulation. Now, deregulation is regulations are being eased in financial markets. Now you all might wonder, okay, we studied about financial regulation and now we are talking about easing regulation. Now don't confuse. There are some regulations where when they are enforced too hard, it impacts the development of financial markets or the financial intermediaries or the financial system as a whole. Okay, now if you have some regulations enforcing on new product development, you are not going to have new financial products in the market. You won't have competition in markets. Do you get it? So to ease on those levels is what you call deregulation. But remember, deregulation also has its costs. Now, financial crisis in 2008 is one of the major consequences of regulations. Why? A new product was launched and that was missold, and it led to an entire global financial crisis. But what you need to understand is, for the development of the market, regulation is also a factor that is important. Because you deregulate, because you allow more breathing space to the intermediaries to act, they are able to find new instruments such as derivatives or structured products, asset-backed securities. So because of these markets, new markets are open. Okay, liberalization is a consequence of deregulation. Liberalization meaning because you are deregulating, markets are open. If you take Sri Lanka, we don't have a closed financial market. Broad companies can invest. On Friday or Thursday, you would have, if you have been listening to financial news, you would have seen that foreign investors are showing interest in our stock market now. At the beginning there was a downfall, and now there are so much of interest coming in, mainly in terms of John Keel shares, which are more investor friendly, foreign investor friendly. So many funds, global funds, are coming in and investing. So because of deregulation, foreign firms are allowed to come in and invest at markets. Foreign financial firms are allowed to get into certain markets and issue instruments, and that is what we call as euro instruments. What I mean is, you now as a Sri Lankan company, you can go to USA and issue instruments, things like that. So that is a development in terms of financial markets. Okay. So deregulation has led to liberalization, but liberalization is also a factor that promotes financial market developments. And then you have globalization. Again, liberalization is also linked to this. Globalization, because every institute is linked, all companies are linked through internet, through technology, even markets are linked. If an occurrence happens in USA market, the drip effects or the fallout effects comes into European and to Chinese markets. It's evident. In terms of financial crisis, you can very well see it, but started in US, moved into other financial markets and affected. Why? Globalization led to the development, led to the connectivity of all these markets. So if a development happened in one market, due to globalization, it moved into other financial markets. You understand? Because the markets are open, when one market develops or one new instrument is issued in one market, it becomes demanded by other firms in other markets in different countries. So globalization led to a way where these developments were directed to different markets. So basic 4 factors that we need to see when it comes of what influences changes in financial markets: technology, deregulation, liberalization, and globalization. But understand, deregulation, liberalization, and globalization is very linked. So it's very hard for you to understand the difference. It's a more of a consequence impact. Because you deregulated, you have liberalization coming in, and one of the spill-off effects of liberalization is globalization. because markets are more open, so many new parties are entering and allowing globalization, and that also as a result promotes development in financial markets. So that's it for today. So with that, we have covered our first lesson. For the ones who missed the very first of the lectures, very first beginning of the lectures, let me run through our subject coverage for you, because there were very few at the time we started, around 1. This will be a chapter summary. So we'll start with, today we finished off introduction to financial system and financial markets. We went through financial system, what it is, the function, the main role. We know the diagrammatical view of it. And then we went into the main 6 components of financial system, the primary and the supporting. Primary, we went through financial intermediaries, where we went through the non-depository and non-depository. Depository, we understood who are contractual investments and who are financial investment companies, investment intermediaries, contractual and investment intermediaries. And then you moved into functions of financial intermediaries. There also we saw on both entities and how their functions differ. And then we moved into financial instruments, the basic functions, the basic parties, the return that you expect out of financial instruments. We studied that. And then we moved into financial regulation, the main 3 reasons why we have financial regulation and the recent regulations impacting us. Okay. And then we went into the supporting. You have financial market service providers, the different types we studied in summary on what the different types that they have. And then we moved into financial market infrastructure. We understood why you need financial market infrastructure, what it did, and what is the policy objective of that infrastructure. And we went through the main payment or the main infrastructure system in Sri Lanka. And then finally we moved into financial markets, where we understood what is a market first of all, and how can you relate it to financial market. Then we understood how it developed, formal and informal, how it developed from informal to formal, and how even in a formal market scenario, how markets are still being developed and what factors are influencing that development. So the first lesson we have covered today. Next week, what we are hoping to cover is classification of financial markets, where we see different types of financial markets. And then we will move on to fundamentals. As I've said before, lessons 1 to 3. 1, 2, and 3 are more theoretical. You won't have much calculations. It's more one-on-one listening. And then from 4 to 9 is where you have to study about markets. So you have calculations in when you study about instruments, the return, the yield, the price, the holding return and whatnot. So lessons 4 to 9 are much more important. And then from 10 to 13, we move to the supplementary areas. We look at the financial service providers in detail. We will see the crisis that financial markets have faced in the past, and then what led to the rise of regulatory bodies. That will be our 12th chapter. Crises have led to find regulatory bodies. The regulatory bodies, how did they come up? Their functions, what do they cover? What market is regulated by what regulator is covered at the 12th chapter. And at the very last, we will cover the recent developments in the financial markets for you to know the new instruments like panda bonds, yen bonds that have been issued in the markets, what it is, why is it, who are the intermediaries involved in those instruments. So those will be covered at 13th chapter, the very last one. After that is where we will have discussion, a brief revisions, and we will go through the past papers. But even in between all these chapters, I will go through the past paper questions so you know where we are heading. All right. So with that, I will conclude our first lecture for today. I hope you all are all safe. Go through the study material. If you all have any queries or any questions, I will type my email address in the chat box. Please email your questions. I will help you out throughout. Study well, stay safe. Okay. And with that, I'm logging out. Bye.